Welcome to Sons of Patriarchy. I'm your host, Peter Bell. Sons of Patriarchy exists to expose the hidden power structures behind Christian nationalism. Through survivor testimonies, shared storytelling, and honest expert critiques from across the political, theological, and cultural spectrums, we shine light on systems of abuse and authoritarian control principally focused on Doug Wilson of Moscow, Idaho, and the movements he has founded and influenced, as well as across Reformed and conservative churches. Our goal is not just to inform, how did we get here, and what do we do about it, but to spark meaningful conversations in homes, faith communities, and public spaces about what a healthier, freer, and more just society can look like. Together, we can dismantle harmful narratives and build communities of mutual respect and diversity. Sons of Patriarchy aims to do what Doug cannot. We will unite people. We do not demand you be like us. We meet you where you are. And while you may not always agree with us, we hope we can agree on this. Churches should be safe. You can find us on all podcasting platforms as well as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, and sonsofpatriarchy.com. Ad-free episodes, bonus content, listening a week ahead of time on both audio and video, monthly Ask Us Anything specials, and many more perks are available across 5 membership levels at patreon.com/sonsofpatriarchy. Much of the same is available via Apple Podcast subscriptions for $4.99 a month. You can give to this work directly at donorbox.com/sons-of-patriarchy. Exclusive Sons of Patriarchy merch is available at sonsofpatriarchy.com/merch. If you'd like to get a hold of us, desire to interview either myself or co-producer Sarah Bader, or you're a news media agency looking for information on Christian nationalism, patriarchy, Doug Wilson, or anything else we covered in this series, go to sonsofpatriarchy.com/contact. Now, on to the episode. Welcome to Let's Get Spiritual, Abuse in the OPC, Part 3. In this episode, we'll speak with Aimee Byrd, a former member of the OPC in the Northeast and a prolific author in her own right, LeReaux, a former member of the OPC in the South, and Heather Nadreau, a former member of Christ Church Spokane, a CREC congregation. Spiritual abuse can be tricky. It doesn't leave a physical mark visible to those in your church. It's not as easy to spot as bruises are, nor is it given the same level of attention as abuse that does. Those left spiritually abused are left dumbfounded, asking how can the church, the bride of Christ, these pastors who are supposed to love and shepherd me, do this to me? The same can be said for those abused sexually, physically, and emotionally, gaslit by their pastors and elders while the rest of the congregation either turns a blind eye or doubts your every word. They are so often more hurt by the neglect, distrust, or slander by those in spiritual authority over them. Spiritual abuse can make you go crazy. It can make you question everything. Those whom you've entrusted your soul, your life, your family, your salvation to, those are the very people who have hurt you. That hurt may not be physical, but it's no less real. The place you go to that you might hear the saving words of Christ, his life, death, resurrection, ascension as the balm and medicine for your soul, becomes the spiritual rod that beats you down. That which was meant to heal you hurts you. So we begin with Aimee Byrd, whom you heard from on Monday's episode, Marketing, or Why the Ends Justify the Means. Now, we discuss her story. The first question I asked her was, how has Doug Wilson, all he stands for, infiltrated into Reformed circles? Because while the Reformed Church may claim Doug Wilson has no foothold, he got in through the back door.
Yes, I knew it was there. But I think I was surprised, not because I didn't see it,
Okay.
But because I was kept trying to see something different.
Mm.
And, I listened to so many that didn't think that way and didn't want it to be like that. And there's a thread of that for
Yeah.
sure. And there's just so many good people in there. So I didn't want to see it.
Yeah.
But, as I was writing my book, The Hope in Her Scars, and then the one following after that, it's interesting to see all the moments of disillusionment where I just kept going anyway.
Yeah. And the part of the series is to, of course, its main focus is to expose all the rot in these circles, more more particularly influenced by Wilson, but it's also the influences it's had on legitimate reform denominations and getting it out of legitimate reform denominations and showing it for what it is. Because it is frustrating because I've seen it like you've seen it. I haven't seen it to anything near the extent that you've seen it. But
Yeah.
attacks on yourself, on your job, on your family, um, and as maybe as much or as little detail, and I'll have a follow-up question after this. Describe again, as use whatever detail you want. Um, what was it like for these 2 years? Is this not just a single, like, oh, I got a few articles against me, I had a pastor against me, or I had a podcast against me, but this is 2 years of to be honest, like shit, like horrible, horrible, horrible abuse. And I
Yeah.
kind of want people to hear some of this stuff because people are going to hear some crazy, crazy stuff
Yeah.
on this series. But this is not just words and podcasting and writings, but this affected you and affected the churches that you're trying to visit, affected the pastors of the churches that you're trying to visit. So talk about the
Yeah. Like
pervasiveness of what this looked like.
everywhere that I was invited to speak still, because I got blacklisted from a lot of places. And, there would be revokes to invitations to where it would be like, keep on going, Aimee. We really need your voice, but um
Not here.
we don't want to cause this much controversy, in our circles or, that kind of thing. Um, or, oh, yes, we want you to come to our church. We've got your back. But what happens is these people went after every single organization or person that hosted me. And they don't play nice, they are coming after you. And so, a lot of these leaders and pastors didn't know what they were in for. And so I'm feeling guilty. um, where their hospitality or they're wanting,
Hmm,
to have my teaching and host it's punished in terrible ways, in ways that really scared them.
hmm.
So they came after their jobs, and that's a scary thing. They came after their reputations because that's what they do. They go right for your reputation, and it doesn't have to be true. They're just going to assign motives to you. And especially if it's a man inviting me to something, sexual motives will be
Hmm.
assigned. It's all just terribly embarrassing. Um, they were upset that no one had pressed charges against me in my denomination, and which I found very interesting because, okay, what charges are you going to press? And they were making up all these things, but
Yeah.
at one point, a pastor in my denomination, who was one of a big ones after me, took a picture from my Facebook social media page of me taking my daughter out to
Yeah.
lunch after church on a Sunday and
Creepy.
spread it all around saying, who's going to help me press charges against Aimee Byrd for breaking the Sabbath? And I'm just thinking, man, if you want to find something on me, like you could find something on me. Like this is not, this is ridiculous. But why are you going after my children?
Hmm.
Like that just angered me. My son is an artist. Like the things that they said about that,
Hmm.
terrible.
Yep.
They posted the link to my church website with a picture of my pastor calling for people to call my session and my pastor and pressure them to press charges against me. And they did. They got a
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
letters and phone calls.
Yeah, they're not joking when they say this stuff. They actually do it.
Yeah. And so as my elders are trying to deal with on the local level, having an elder in Geneva Commons and, all of that, that elder pressed charges against them. It goes to presbytery. Meanwhile, I'm like, what do I do? Like, where does my voice come into this? And this is the part with the church polity that was, it seemed benevolent, but it was horrible for me. And it was, in the OPC, you have to do things like file a complaint,
Yep.
right? Or press charges. Like, you don't learn how to do that kind of stuff when you become a member. And it is very complicated. It's not something easy. You have to use certain language and go through all these steps. And so they're like, you know what? Let us do this for you. These male leaders who are experienced with this in the denomination, you don't need to stress out over all of this. You don't need to go through all this. Let us do that for you. And so I know their intentions were benevolent, but it also was a way to take the pen from me, right? And somebody else is now telling my story and doing it through the language that will, like, quote unquote, like, I don't know what the right word is, legally work in the ecclesial setting of the OPC and church order. And so I go to this presbytery meeting to support my pastor and elders because charges are being filed against them. And that was one of the most traumatizing experiences, because I expected these men to be reasonable, and I expected them to be loving and Christ-like. And I expected them to, like, even offer condolences for the behavior of leaders towards a sister in Christ and under their care. And I was mocked by the leader. He made fun of the title of my book, saying, who needs to recover from the Bible? He referred to me as that lady a couple times. Like, I'm not even a person worth naming. I'm sitting right there. And kind of just minimized anything that I'd been through and kind of leveled what I'd gone through, what I was doing by writing about this stuff, causing trouble, like, and leveling that against the damage done by these officers who have come after me. So, like, kind of sin leveling here. I'd done something wrong too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you deserve this, so that's why we're coming after
I deserve it. Yeah. And then there were jokes made. Why don't everybody just take a walk and get off the internet? As if my vocation isn't affected by all of this.
Yeah.
And when he made these jokes, people laughed. I'm sitting there being laughed at, and nobody stood up who was allowed to speak to say you're out of order. Nobody. And I sat back, I wasn't allowed to speak. And I thought, there's no Christ here. This is total darkness, and it's a charade. I mean, I watched 2 or 3 hours of men debating church order, like, bad lawyers, pretending to be bad lawyers, but they're pastors and elders.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying. And when my husband and I got in the car, we both thought, we didn't speak up because we weren't, quote unquote, allowed, but we also didn't want it to fall back badly on our pastor and elders. But we got in the car and my husband was like, man, we should have just said something. He's like, what are they going to do? Put us in OPC jail? That's what it seemed like in there, like it was. So yeah, what I'm saying was, when you asked me before about, did I see this? At first I kept telling myself that these are just some fringe people, and there'll always be these fringe people, but we need to do something about that.
Yeah.
And I thought something would be done about it. Like, I believed the people who were fighting for my case in the OPC, and who are pastors and mature ones. And I believed that this would be set right. Because I wanted to believe that.
Yep.
Because the other thought is just terrifying.
Yeah. That your own denomination will turn against you and be silent and do nothing.
Yeah. And these people can keep going and growing because they're in a culture that enables it.
You have heard this throughout the series, but Aimee's been part of these circles for years. She saw it from the inside, and especially so from her seat in the OPC. Here's more.
Oh yeah. I was very aware. And interestingly enough, like my first book came out in 2013.
Uh-huh.
And I at the time was, very supportive of complementarianism.
Mhm.
And I even was, I don't know if supportive is the right word, but I was friendly towards biblical manhood and womanhood as the movement at that time. And so many of the blogs I read promoted that. And so within that, and that was an interesting part, is within that, Doug Wilson was also promoted.
Hmm.
And way back in 2015, and this is when I began critiquing this, when I started seeing how dangerous it was and what it was doing to churches and to women and to families. Way back in February of 2015, Rachel Miller wrote a blog post. Was it February? Maybe it wasn't February. You might want to take that part out. Way back in 2015, Rachel Miller wrote an article on her blog called A Question for Wilson Fans. And she was not directing her post, and she says this, that she wasn't directing her post towards those who are like major Wilson believers,
Mhm.
that she's not going to change their mind. But she was, talking to the John Pipers and the
Mhm.
TGC people and all these people out there platforming Wilson, people that were supposed to be trusted parachurch organizations in reformed circles. And, here's when some of these major abuse stories were starting to come out from his church.
Mhm.
And she said, if that isn't good enough, like leading up to that, what is it that makes you want to promote him? And so she asks, is it his credentials? And she goes down to, how this man ordained himself
Mhm.
pretty much and started his own church and his own denomination and his own publishing house and school and all these things. And he has zero accountability. She said, is it his views on slavery? And she goes and quotes through all that. Is it the plagiarism that
Mhm.
he's been found, guilty of? Is it his federal vision teaching or his baptismal regeneration, which is, against Reformed teaching? Is it his patriarchy? Is it his views on sex? Is it his misogynistic comments? At this time, it was well publicized that he was, calling women Twinkies and tight tops and small-breasted biddies. And, why isn't this enough to make you stop platforming him on your big sites? Is it the fact that he is marrying a known pedophile, to someone in his church? She's saying all this. Which one is it that makes you want to be a supporter and a promoter of Doug Wilson's teaching? Because it is harming all the people who look to you and trust you. And you're saying his teaching is good. I like his teaching. So the influence was coming from, all these places that women and men trusted.
Aimee and her family had been members of the OPC for years. She saw this coming into the denomination and was confused. The OPC, among other Reformed churches, have position papers condemning CREC and Wilson theology, and rightfully so. And yet, his influence was alive and well. How could this happen in the OPC? Here's her answer.
Well, and I really tried to address training for pastors and elders and presbyteries to be trauma informed,
Yep.
to maybe reform some of
And
this.
now that stuff is being made fun of that I've seen recently is the trauma education, the abuse education, OPC pastors, and I'll just freely admit it. They're just like they mock it. Like there's no abuse here. There's nothing that's happening like that. This is just the woke agenda coming into the OPC
Yeah.
circles. That we're elevating these victims and we're gonna try to take all these accusers or try to take all the victimizers out. And so it is disgusting.
Yeah, they talk about me like I'm whining. But it's interesting they use these words that you'll use for women.
Yep. Yeah. So before I go into my next question, one of the concluding questions, and this, I know this is a hypothetical, but I think it's helpful to ask. I've asked it for a few others who are formerly part of Reformed denominations whose churches, more particularly so, were influenced by this. Um, what would have happened had the OPC fought for your case, or your church fought for your case, uh, if they noticed this encroaching coming in and said, "We're going to fight for Aimee," do you think you would have stayed, or how would how do you wish this would have been handled? And do you think things would have gone differently if that were the case?
Yeah, sure. Things would have definitely gone differently. I stayed in, like I said, for 2 years,
Yeah.
following it all the way through to the General Assembly. And I look back and think, what was I thinking? Because I thought that I wanted to show my kids that you work to do what's right, to make things
Yeah.
right. And I was picking up the tab the whole time.
Hmm.
And what you were saying, what this looks like, the trauma, I thought I'm level headed. I've got thick skin. I can
Hmm.
reason my way out of this, like in my head, what these people are saying about me isn't true. This is true, and
Yeah.
I would do that. But then I found, I'm going on a hike for 4 hours and left my car running the entire time. When I come back, I realize I left my gas grill on all night long. Just these are the effects of trauma.
Hmm.
The brain fog, your body is keeping the score and your body is telling you you're not safe. So man, I stuffed all that down until a therapist who specializes in spiritual abuse said to me, why do you think you need to be a missionary in your own denomination? Because I
Hmm.
really was thinking like
Hmm.
there were enough leaders that wanted to address this, and there does need to be like what I thought at the time reform.
Big time, 100%.
And so I was trying to work towards that, and I just thought if these people just understand, if they just see what's happening, if they just get it. Um, so yeah, things could have gone a lot differently, but now being outside of that water, not
Yeah.
breathing in that water or air, I'm embarrassed I stayed so long.
Hmm.
I'm embarrassed for what I believed about it. I feel like I was complicit in my own abuse and what my children saw happen to their mother and what happened to them through it at very transformative times, impressionable times as teenagers and young adults. Um, the damage done to my family is horrible, and just their view of church.
Yeah.
Um, and walking into any other church space, like being able to trust.
Hmm.
My kids' bullshit detectors are just like super. But when you have that, like, it's really hard. Christian language itself is stained in a lot of ways because it was weaponized
Hmm.
against our family. So yeah, I mean, I think more than reform is needed. I think resurrection is needed because there are deaths that need to happen, and people aren't willing
Yep. I agree.
to
I
do that.
I 100% agree. This is again my own denomination. I 100%, 100%, 100% agree with this, and I know more attacks are going to happen, and I think you need that just to root out what's evil and bad and call it what it is. And I think this. I also asked that question too because I think the general idea or sentiment within reform circles was like the real Aimee Byrd came out in 2020, and she's been trying to get out of the OPC ever since then, and that she's a feminist disguised in Orthodox confessional clothing, and
Hmm.
this is her breakout from all this stuff, and she couldn't wait to separate herself from reform circles, and your story is actually quite
It was
the opposite.
heartbreaking
Yeah,
leaving my church. I
yeah,
loved my church. I had so many relationships there. My family served in all different ways there. It was truly heartbreaking.
yeah. And I want to underline that This is not Aimee, and I'm sure now you feel more free in some ways than you did then. But this is not like, thank God I'm out of this. Or thank God I'm out of the OPC. It's no, I actually wanted to stay at that church and I wanted to be pastored by that pastor. I wanted to be in this community. And even you talk about this in some of your books, that this is a beautiful community until it wasn't. So
Right.
I want to underline that to kind of go against the narrative a little bit. What I know is out there. And then Aimee published Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, and it lit the Reformed world on fire. What was hidden under the surface was now laid bare.
Yeah, as the book was, being promoted pre-publication, and I was sharing things about it online, I was getting major trolls in my comments, and it was hard because you don't want everything you say to be stained, and it also makes you think about everything you're going to say too. Like, you're trying to say things in a way that is not going to be misunderstood,
Yeah.
that is not going to be bait, for these people. And it just doesn't matter. They're going to come
No.
after you anyway. And if they can't come after what you're saying, then they're going to come after your looks.
Yep.
They're going to make sexual comments about you, and they'll even talk about your children. It's just terrible,
And
terrible.
what you're doing in the book is you're actually calling out mostly like false Trinitarian theologies. It's paralleled or layered onto gender roles. And the
Yes.
muck it makes of Trinitarian theology very orthodox. And so nothing you're saying in this book is outside of orthodox Christian theology, but it's because of the people that you're going after in this that I'm assuming a lot of them are like, oh, you can't go after those sacred cows. Those are not the people that you can go after.
Well, biblical manhood and womanhood, and I, put air quotes around
Yeah.
that, is a movement. It's a
Mhm.
movement that started, over 30 years ago, to try to combat what they called evangelical feminism.
Yeah.
And so what I was trying to do was to critique from the inside of complementarianism. And I wanted to broaden the way that we look at this, outside of these biblicists' reading of scripture, to a more rich biblical theological reading
Mhm.
of scripture. And I wanted to resource a lot of old writing and
Mhm.
theologians on that as well. And I also wanted to read widely, not just within our insular circles. And so, yes, it was a critique, but it was also, and I think primarily, an invitation to
Mhm.
look at the way that male and female voices function in scripture,
Yep.
look at the typology in that.
There's a critique from the inside, not a critique from the outside.
That's what and I wrote this book within the bounds of the confessions that my
Mhm.
former denomination that I was in at the time, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, upheld. And so I wrote within those bounds of those confessions.
Mhm.
And I even had in mind a report on women in the church that,
Yeah.
I think it was in around like 1988 or 1990 or something, that was given in my denomination. Um, I think my book was well within the bounds of that
It was. Yeah.
as well. But I also wanted to talk about the nature of discipleship and where that happens and where we see it happening now in the parachurch more than in the church
Yeah.
itself. And then again, and expand on what I've written before about our great honor and responsibilities as brothers and sisters in the church. And so the book was really about discipleship.
Mhm.
It wasn't about, becoming ordained or
It
becoming
was
some
not.
sort of,
And I'm pretty sure I
leader with
highlighted
an official title.
two parts in the book where I think you said, at least at that point, that you affirmed male only ordination. But let me talk about discipleship of women in the church. Let me talk about female teachers in the church. What does this look like? How do we do this? All that
Mhm.
stuff. And so people who read into it weren't reading what you were writing, at least back
Yeah.
then.
Well, and I was kind of bracing myself as the book was coming out. I knew that it was going to be, because, the title itself was tongue in cheek. It
Yeah, it
wasn't the
was. Yeah.
original title that I had hoped for, but now I find how true that title is, because I'm
Yep.
really still recovering.
Yep. Yep.
So it was very appropriate, but to go after this kind of sacred cow, in Reformed evangelicalism, which is quote unquote biblical manhood and womanhood and the teachings of it, was definitely, I think, hard for people to even read my words for what they said, or to read a good faith reading of
Yeah, it
the
was
book.
read through a prism of presuppositions, what you were writing about versus
what kind of person I am, and
versus what the
what my
book was
motives
actually
are.
about and calling out.
Yeah. And so I kept seeing people saying that I have a feminist agenda. And I thought that is very interesting because I don't even know what that is.
You call that a feminist book? I don't know what you actually think about real feminist books.
And that's the hard part too, because I was trying to challenge both complementarians and egalitarians in the book. And so you're not satisfying any big groups in writing this book, right? However, I will say that the egalitarians were much friendlier towards me in it. So yes, the reaction against this book as it's starting to come out is already these warnings about, what I'm going to say. And so, this podcast that I was a part of, The Mortification of Spin, it was with an academic and a pastor in the PCA. And so we had the idea that let's try to model healthy disagreement, since we have all these, horrible voices out there, like hurling names and motives at me, because I believed that PCA pastor probably was going to disagree with some things in my book. And so let's do this in a healthy way. So we went on and recorded that podcast. And in the podcast, he said, like, in principle, your theological arguments, I don't have any disagreements with. There's going to be some applications, though, that I would push back on. And I thought, oh, wow, okay, this is interesting. It made me feel like it affirmed for me how careful I was with my arguments, that somebody this conservative would say, okay, theologically speaking, in principle here, I don't have any problems with your arguments. So I thought we had a good recording. I ended up getting fired from that podcast after the book was published, which was like that week. So that was interesting too. Well, I didn't get fired right away, and they didn't use the word fired. They no longer wish to contract my work, but they hope to show me grace on my way out, is what they said. But anyway, they wanted me to answer. They published something on their website wanting me to answer 9 questions that these, unnamed men were concerned about. And they were odd questions. The first question was about the nature of male authority and natural theology. And so right there, that was like showing me their cards, what this is about. And then they asked questions about marriage, my beliefs on marriage, which I thought, well, that's interesting. I haven't written anything about marriage. Like, why am I getting asked this question? Some were already misrepresenting my writing. Like, okay, well, maybe you should read the book and then ask me these questions that you want to ask. But, I'd worked with them for like 7 years. So I was kind of shocked at the method of doing this, like not naming who's asking me these questions. Maybe they could have done an interview type format if they wanted to ask me questions. It all felt kind of like I was on the defensive, and I felt like there was a gun to my feet, like, dance.
There's a
Aimee.
gun at you, but you weren't sure what it was pointed at.
Yeah. And so I did seek advice on, should I answer these? Because there's this part of me that just wants to explain myself and answer these questions. But I don't, if I can say this on here, but it's kind of, you're damned if you don't, damned if you do answer these questions. And why do that? Like, they've never done that to anyone else. Why would I answer to people who won't even name themselves? So I decided not to answer the questions, and that's when I got let go. And, I'm sure that there were donors that were not happy with the book coming out. I know there's a lot of connections with, certain seminaries and certain people in that group in Genevan Commons, and just theologies, anthropology that's being taught there. And there were definitely podcasts being talked about me and things like that too. So that was, things kind of were falling apart everywhere. So in my church, one of my elders was in Geneva Commons. And so here I have to address this deep violation of trust and betrayal that I felt from an elder whom I'd gone to when I first got tagged in that Geneva Commons comment thread and got kicked out, because I knew he was in there. So and he witnessed that. So I asked him to keep an eye if things got concerning, to let me know. And here it was when I found out and first started seeing all these screenshots. I was about to drive to an OPC retreat, which was in the middle of like nowhere, to be the speaker for their like 20th anniversary of women's retreats or something like that. And they had joked around. That's the one that they called head of like crazy. And they had joked around about possibly some of them meeting up there at the same time. So, I was starting to get concerned about my own safety. When am I going to run into one of these guys? And what are they willing to do?
Yep.
If they can talk about me like this and say these horrible things and dehumanize me in the ways that they have, what are they willing to do? And then, so there's like my vocation of speaking and writing being affected. There's my vocation of the podcasting and relationships I had there. There's in my own church. There was just so many levels to this influence and this type of teaching. And then when I did, when my elders and pastor tried to address this, that was happening to me, I went through 2 years of the process of quote unquote proper church order that was so revealing to me and just for, way more traumatizing than seeing what's happening in Geneva Commons, was seeing what's enabled and how pervasive these views are within much of the leadership in my own denomination and presbytery and church.
Controversy broke out, alliances were formed, and what Aimee saw in seed form years back was now charging against her. So now that this is behind her, and Aimee is no longer part of the OPC, what advice would she give to those in Nay Park circles that may not agree with Doug theologically, but share some cultural and or political similarities?
Yeah, I would try to empathize with their intentions. But, I don't want to tell somebody, don't read this. But because, we're all adults and need to decide what we're going to read and not. But I would encourage them to read widely because, that language alone is so fear-based, this fighting this good fight and everything. Maybe it isn't as much of a battle as you think it is. Maybe the other side isn't being represented well in what you're reading. Like, read for yourself what other people are saying. And there are plenty of other much better writers and thinkers to talk about things like marriage and politics and where you can find your values represented without dehumanizing both sexes, without harming people, without plagiarizing, without racism, and who might have better credentials and better accountability. I just would encourage them to read widely and maybe not be led by fear.
For those who are inside OPC churches that pay lip service to, we don't agree with Doug, but it's obvious the influence is still there, what advice would Aimee give?
Yeah, I run the other way. You don't have to be there, is what I would say. You shouldn't be in any spaces where you have to prove your own worth and value or that of others. Period. This is church. This is the place where we're supposed to love. So don't play the game. I played that game for 2 years. And let me tell you, it doesn't help. It harms you harms you much more. And I would say to find other people that you can go to that are safe. People like professional therapists for one, but if you can have friends outside of these circles. And I know so many of the people who've come to me have had it much worse than me, and it's private. Yeah, it's not, they're not being publicly humiliated or harassed, but they're in homes with sexual abuse from their own husbands, and going to elders that are telling them they're not being submissive enough and to just be a better wife and to take it. And far worse, like some of them's husbands are abusing minors in the church, and nothing is being done. So I know that it's not as easy for some who are in these marriages, but at the same time, continuing to go in these spaces is just going to get worse and worse, and you are not protected at all. So if you could find somebody safe to talk to, especially when it's in, you know, these physically abusive situations as well, or in these terrible marriages, authorities need to be called. Usually, you need to seek centers that can help you in these ways, and professional places that can help you in these ways. And there are a lot of places to turn to. We keep turning back to these churches that ostensibly are there to care for our souls, and they're harming so many people. And I hate to say that about Christ Church. I in my writing so much, I am, you know, my last book was about rising from disillusionment, about Christ's love for his bride. And I'm fighting to love Christ Church still. But that means we got to name the stuff that is not of Christ in his church.
Lastly, I asked Aimee to talk to those who were spiritually abusive towards her, who used their positions of authority to threaten her, and who sent nasty messages about her appearance and her family to her. Here's what she ended with.
Well, I just think it's time for anybody who has harmed anyone, much less so many people, that it's time to be ministered to, you know, to be shepherded, and to not be ministering to others at this point, to learn, to want to learn how to love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, these are the basics, but they're the most important thing. And so while I'm very concerned about all the people they're harming themselves first too, and their own relationship with God. So for me, I just really think that it's time for some critical self-evaluation and a humbling to be ministered to, because life is short and it's not too late to experience the love of God and to grow in that.
Next, we move on to LeReaux and her experience at an OPC in the South.
Yeah, so my name is LeReaux, and the church that we left was Reformation or Resurrection Presbyterian Church in Matthews, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. And they're currently still an Orthodox Presbyterian church, and we'll talk about why that is important in this conversation. So, first question, can you talk to us about your time in the OPC and how that started transitioning into hearing more about Wilson? Maybe not explicitly, but I guess implicitly within this church and denomination.
Yeah, so I grew up in the OPC. The first church that I was a member of was an OPC in Southern California. So I grew up in it, and I also grew up knowing who Douglas Wilson was, because my parents, they had all of his books. and I was homeschooled, so we used his homeschooling curriculum as well. So I was very familiar with just Douglas Wilson and Federal Vision um, theology. Yeah. So the first church that I became a member of in Southern California, I was a member of that church until my husband and I moved from Southern California to North Carolina. And at that time, because of just my history in the OPC and ease of transferring membership and kind of finding a community outside of the bubble that we were in Southern California, we were looking for an OPC. And friends of ours recommended, well, at the time it was called Matthews OPC. And they recommended it to us, and they said, the leadership there is really great. The congregation, the community there is really wonderful. Definitely start going there. And they had asked us if they could give our information to the leadership because we were going to be moving over. And they were telling us, because I think they will, they'll help you guys even if you don't attend there. So our information was given to some of the leadership at Matthews OPC. And as my husband and I drove over, they reached out to us and they were like, we hear you're coming. Let us know when you're here. We'll have meals for you. We'll help you move. We can give you, recommendations for this and that. And my husband and I were immediately feeling welcomed there, even though we had never, we weren't even in that state yet. And they were already offering community and help and care for us. And so we were excited to go and have our first Sunday there. And our first Sunday there, everyone in the congregation, congregates and leadership alike, were coming up to us and wanting to talk to us. And they did not ask shallow questions. They very much seemed that they wanted to know us and know us well. And everyone was inviting us to their homes and saying, oh, come to our home this day of the week. We'll cook this for you. What can we do for you? How can we help you move? What can we provide for you? And so it felt overwhelming, but overwhelming in a good sense of just community and love, which, leaving everything you've known your whole life, that felt very good and needed. So, we were just immediately welcomed in, pulled in. Yeah.
The influence didn't first creep in theologically, as you will hear, but culturally, as is so often the case. It came in through racism and how the church handled a self-proclaimed neo-Nazi.
Well, I do want to, so our very first Sunday there.
Oh, yeah.
We were invited to the associate pastor's home for lunch after service.
Yep.
And we went and we had a really wonderful meal of, pot roast and everything. And they had small children. And we had our young son at the time. And they were another young couple. And we're just kind of, talking. They're asking questions. We're asking questions, kind of getting to know one another. And then at the end of the meal, the associate pastor just says, I just want to let you guys know something, that our church just recently experienced a very large split. And he's explaining that the split was because the head pastor believes in paedo communion, and that really bothered quite a few people within the congregation, that they were worried that was a sign to them that he might have possibly believed in federal vision. And so they were worried about that. And he was explaining to us that the session took that worry seriously, and that they interviewed him extensively and kind of sat him down, and he gave the impression that they really asked him hard questions to understand if he believed any of the other federal vision tenets. And he said that they came out, the session came out just understanding that he did not, trusting that he did not believe any of those tenets aside from just his pedo communion beliefs, and that they went back to the congregation and explained their findings, and that they said, no, we find him to be fine, and that some of the congregation was still not comfortable with it. And he explained to us too that that the head pastor that he would not serve communion, that was kind of like their decision, that he would then not serve communion when it came time, so that he didn't feel, so that no one in the congregation felt that he would try to give communion to any children or babies or anything like that, but that, they wanted to safeguard the table and people's consciences, and that the people who left just still did not feel that that was enough. But he assured us that, that their church takes federal vision seriously, that they don't want to have anything to do with that. And he specifically name dropped Doug Wilson. And because of my growing up in a federal visionist home, to me, that was a big deal, because I wasn't the one who brought it up. He brought this name to me and said, we don't want to have anything to do with that. We don't like this person and these beliefs. And we want to safeguard our church against that. And so to my husband and myself, that was a giant green flag. We were like, yes, okay, you brought this to us. We really appreciate this information. And so we felt like we were joining a safe church. And I guess for us, kind of first little red flags that we didn't necessarily.
It started off well to maybe like, at least sort of well, sorry to interrupt, but it started off well where the associate pastor flagged this for you, even though it's concerning that the pastor still held a pedo communion.
Right.
He at least flagged it for you.
Right. And so I felt like you are presenting, you're giving this to us. You're not trying to hide these issues, but you're laying them on the table and saying, we're not perfect. We have this issue. And he even presented it as the split really hurt everyone in the church, and we're very heart grieved over it. But these people who left, we consider them our friends still. And he talked about them in the sense of, we still commune with them. They're still our friends. Like, we still have relations with them. They just couldn't sit under this sort of leadership that believed this, even though none of the other elders believed this. They didn't want to sit under the head pastor believing this. And
so those who stayed were comfortable with this.
They were comfortable with they weren't comfortable with him being pedo communion, but they were comfortable with the session deciding that he would not serve communion.
Got it.
And them trusting their, I believe he used the word interview, but their interview of the head pastor and asking him questions to see if he believed in federal vision or not. So those were the people who stayed. And when we were going around to other people's homes, we kind of got a similar story of people like them. They kind of bring it up a little. Nobody was really giving too many details around it. It's still very much, looking back, I feel like it was a little scripted with them giving like the similar kind of breadcrumbs without really giving much else. And
just enough to make you feel comfortable.
Yes. Yeah. Kind of like laying a foundation of what they want you to see as the truth.
Sure.
And it was really only looking back now, I can see that it was only leadership people or people who were close to leadership who were speaking about it in this way. There was one family when we went to their home, and they were kind of uh, encouraging us to visit other churches
Hmm.
and saying, no, like don't just settle here just because it's the first one you've come to, like visit other churches. And we became very close with them, and they were actually a family that left
Hmm.
um, for very similar reasons as
Hmm.
we did.
They're trying to
And
warn
I'm
you
like,
in a
why
very
didn't
nice
I
way.
listen to? Why didn't I hear your word of warning? Instead, to me, I was like, my husband he will say that when they were explaining this to him, he was like, wow, they're not being very clingy, and like you have to come here. And so,
Hmm.
so yeah. But I will say, like, some of the first little things to us, or to me, that made me feel a little uncomfortable there was everyone was very quick to point out that we were um, these sort of oddball people from California,
Hmm.
from the way that we spoke to the way that we dressed to the foods that we ate. Um, and they would make mocking comments like, oh, you must be very afraid of guns, or just little like little things where at the time I just kind of brushed it off as that's just Southern
Hmm.
culture
Hmm.
and everything, and not really recognizing it as like microaggression. Um,
California is a massive state, and there's a lot of difference in it.
right. And or they call us hipster hippies. I was like, you guys, like that's you don't know what those words mean. um, but and so not really recognizing those as the microaggressions or the passive aggressiveness that it was. Um, but just thinking that it was Southern culture. And we were just California culture, and you know, um, not necessarily seeing it as a church culture or even a leadership viewpoint at that time.
Mhm.
Um, the time when I started to, or my husband and I started to question the leadership, though, was I believe it was the um, end of 2017, because I was pregnant with our daughter at the time. They called so after the Sunday service every week, the young children would go off to Sunday school, and for the um, young adults and other adults of the congregation, we would have like a congregational prayer meeting. And it was essentially where we would all kind of come together to share praises or prayer requests. Um, and then we would kind of like popcorn pray over all of the things that were brought up. But this time they said that they wanted the um, high school students and um, to attend as well. And they were saying it's going to be something a little different. And they were explaining, so everybody's there, and they explained to us that the previous week, um, someone who had there was a gentleman who came who had used to be a member of their church when he was young, but had been excommunicated sometime in his young adulthood. Um, and I don't remember why he had been excommunicated. My husband and I were not there for any of that because it had been years prior. But anyway, he had come to the church, and on a Sunday evening, and and like he had Nazi memorabilia. Um, so he had like swastikas and other things that he was wearing, and it made a lot of people very uncomfortable, obviously.
Mhm.
And so the leadership had gone and spoken to him, like, why are you here? what's going on. And he had expressed to them a desire to come back to church, that he wanted to be a part of the congregation again. And so they were wanting to bring this up to us to discuss. And they were explaining to us that they had been meeting with him that week. They didn't specify how many times they had met with him, but that they were concerned because he was I think he had founded, but he was also a leader of a local Antifa group.
Mm-hmm.
And was very active on social media, posting like his weapons and just a lot of Antifa slogans. And, I mean, he was a leader of that group. And so they were concerned about that. And so they were asking him, are you still a part of that group? And he was assuring them that he was not, that he didn't want anything to do with that. And they were explaining to us that they knew that he had Kennist beliefs. And they were just wanting to make sure that he understood that he didn't get to talk about that at church, that he needed to not be discussing that. And if they found out he'd be asked to leave. And so they're saying all these things to kind of explain to us, the congregation, why they came to the decision that they felt that he was safe to allow into the congregation and to be attending, that they had made, that they were going to, as a session, be watching him. They also had a security team where there were certain men in the congregation who had conceal carries. And so they would conceal carry in the church. They were as part of security.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said that, everybody's going to kind of be watching him and making sure that things are fine. And so they were just what does the congregation think? And most of the people were just kind of raising their hands and saying how, that does make them a little bit uncomfortable, but that they trust the session and that they trust their wisdom. And, about 10 people had said that. And I was just sitting there and realizing to myself that, we have very few people of color in our congregation. And I raised my hand to ask a question, and I just said, I mean this as respectfully as I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to ask how you can determine, have you seen him interact with people of color, or talk to him about how he will interact with people of color? Because I said, how can you tell us that he's safe, or that you feel safe with him, because all of you are white males?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole body language of all of them up on the stage changed.
I imagine that didn't go over well with them. Yeah.
And they did not. They just kind of all sat up straighter and were just all looking at me.
Yeah.
And it was
Introducing quote unquote CRT into the church and being all woke and stuff.
right, the California girl, right?
Yeah, of
Being
course,
the
it's the California girl. Yep.
Right. And so and they're just looking at me, and it was just quiet for a moment. Nothing was being said. And then they just kind of were restated that, well, we've checked him out, we've interviewed him, and we think he's safe. And so they didn't answer my question at all. And then someone sitting next to me, a friend of ours, raises his hand and he goes, I just want to let you know that you have our explicit trust in this situation, and we all trust you. And I was thinking, that is not the way to go. You should not just blindly trust anyone. And you should be able to ask questions, and you should be able to ask for more information, and not just right off the bat go, I just trust you.
Mhm.
I just trust you just because. And so when that meeting ended up being wrapped up with them saying that they were going to let him attend and that they're going to be watching him, and a few of the people of color came up to me afterwards and they just said, thank you for asking that question because they did not feel safe to ask questions during that meeting, and that they all felt very uncomfortable with him being allowed to come. And all of them left after that meeting. They didn't attend that church anymore,
Hmm.
which really broke my heart that they felt they that their safe place was no longer safe for them.
Safe for other people, but not for them.
Right. Yeah, that other people, it's like, of course, that man is going to feel or be presenting himself as safe to the white congregation or the white leadership because they're not the ones that he has problems with.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I were very uncomfortable with that. But that night, after we got home from the meeting, my husband was called by the associate pastor and was kind of chewed out a little bit for my asking a question.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, if Allie had a problem with this, like she could have come and talked to us about it after the meeting and we could have given her more information.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband was saying, no, like that was the forum for her to
Mm-hmm.
ask
You asked a
questions.
public question and she asked a public question.
Yeah. And he was like, if you had more information, you could have given it to her right then. And he was like, no, like she could have asked us like, um, and, uh, and then was essentially like, saying that he's calling, other congregates to kind of like get more information from them to see, how they're feeling about the decision that occurred tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband was like, well, my wife and I are very uncomfortable with him being there. We did not feel comfortable with him being around our child or possibly children at that time. Like I hadn't given birth yet, but I didn't know what he could say to them. I was feeling worried about like down the line, if he does become a member, is he going to be um, teaching Sunday school classes or things like that? Is there a way for him to be able to be spreading these beliefs that he has, but also having that presence in the congregation um, for I was worried at the time that we would not have any more people of color come and join the church, and it would just be predominantly just white. Um, and that was a worry to me because I know that that's not what heaven is going to look like. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't want my congregation to look that way.
Yeah. Neither do I
Um,
imagine your community looked entirely all white either.
no, it doesn't at all. And so for none of them to want to go there, that was just a worry of mine that that this would no longer be a safe place for members of our community.
The influence doesn't end with racism, nor the church's softer stance towards the young man who came in with Nazi regalia. The church was clear on their stance concerning spanking.
Yeah, so the spanking was a very big deal. My husband and I grew up in very physically abusive homes. He grew up in an atheist home that was very physically abusive, and I grew up in a federal visionist home that was very abusive. So then when we had our son, um, we just came to this conclusion that we need to do something different. Um, and we found respectful parenting groups that were Christian and presenting a different way of parenting. And we had decided that we were going to parent this way. And myself, growing up in the church community, I understand very well that goes against the grain of a lot of the Christian community. And so it was something that I would kind of talk about, but not a whole lot in person. I would share articles online and to kind of deal with the theology that the church uses to support spanking, the history behind how modern day spanking occurs versus the actual Jewish practice of discipline. And this church that we came to, they were very pro spanking, which again, that was not something at the time that I was surprised by, or that I felt like that was something I could avoid in a church community. But they would sell books in their library, Shepherding a Child's Heart, and they would sell it with actual leather paddles.
At the church.
At the church. And parents would take their small children out of the sanctuary into a bathroom or the foyer to spank them. And you would be in the sanctuary and you could hear the little babies or children crying. Mm-hmm. And for myself, it was very traumatic. And even though my husband and I felt very uncomfortable with that, again, you kind of don't feel like you really have any other options for a place to go. And so with me posting articles online, I was friends with some of the congregates on Facebook, and they were seeing these articles, and it got to leadership that we did not spank.
Of course.
And we had been there for a couple of years, really before it seemed like it became a problem. And I think it's because at the time our son was so little, and my son has a very soft personality. And most of the people there really would just compliment him all the time and say what a sweet toddler he was. And so I think because of that, it wasn't necessarily an issue with any of them to kind of, they would just brush it off as his personality was because that's just the way his personality was, and not because we didn't spank or anything like that, which, that is the personality God gave him. And so I'm not going to credit it to myself or my husband or anything like that. But anyway, so that's why I think we didn't really butt heads with them on the spanking issue until we had been there for a few years. And then there was a Christmas morning where we had friends over who were dear friends of ours to celebrate Christmas with us. And my son, at the time, he was just about to turn 4. And he calls me over to the side, and he's asking if we can open presents now. And I was explaining to him that we're gonna have to just wait because our friends haven't quite finished breakfast yet. And he just starts to cry because he is ready to open his gifts. It's Christmas morning. And I understood. And I picked him up so that I could take him upstairs so that he could cry, but so that he wasn't disturbing anyone downstairs. And after my son was calm and everything, and we went back downstairs, the husband was explaining how kind of that bothered him, that I did that because, children need to be spanked. And I just let him get away with throwing a temper tantrum. And then we ended up, so then that day passes and no more is really said about it. And then we find out that he went to his father-in-law, who was an elder at the church,
Mm.
and explained the situation, and that really bothered all of them. So then we started being talked to by the associate pastor, and he started asking kind of questions, mostly to my husband, about like, oh, so you guys aren't spanking. Well, at least you're spanking, right? Like just kind of like just dropping it into conversation and kind of prodding. And my husband's like, that we don't spank. Um, and no, this is not something that we're doing. Um, and uh, then there's a Sunday, um, in 2020 where my husband is sick, and so he stays home, and I take my son and my uh, baby daughter to church. And the pastor has been going through Ezra, and he's coming to the end of Ezra, and he has this sermon titled The Ezra Mandate. And he's going on and on about, how Ezra has been given this power, by this authority by God and the secular government at the time to not only teach, but discipline according to God's law.
Okay.
And so he's
I'm
going
trying
on
to follow
about,
his logic in the book.
well in the first bit of his sermon, he sounds like he's making an argument for theocracy.
Uh-huh.
How they're like, Ezra is mandated to go back to Israel and essentially flog, whip, or even kill those who are not obeying the law.
Okay.
And so this should tell us how important it is, how important the law is. This should put fear in us when it comes to the law. And then he starts going on about how parents have been given an Ezra mandate.
Ah.
They've been given an Ezra mandate to teach and discipline when God's law has been broken. And he goes on to say that this next part where I'm going to be talking about this, he goes, it'll probably make some of you uncomfortable. And then he looks right at me and he goes, and it might even make some of you very afraid. And he looked right at me as he said that. And so I was like, okay, here we go. Like he's speaking to me. And he goes on to talk about how parents are commanded to spank their children, that if their toddler throws a fit, that they are commanded to be swift and to cause necessary harm, pain, he says it, for lasting, I don't remember how he worded it exactly, but for lasting change to occur. Temporary pain needs to be inflicted. And he goes on to say, now I understand that there are some people who are bothered by this. And he just goes on to explain that if someone has a problem with this, then it's because they have a problem with God. And he's looking at me as he says it. And so then I felt very uncomfortable and took my son and my daughter I took them out of the sanctuary into the nursery, because my thought process was, okay, as soon as the sermon ends, I'm just going to head home. And then the sermon ends and my son's asking, can he please go get a snack and say hi to his friends? And so I was said, all right, that's fine. We can go do that really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And as he goes out, normally on Sundays, I'm met with, hey, how are you? How was your week? How are you doing? How are things? And instead, I was met with people coming up to me and kind of putting their hand on my shoulder and going, "How are you okay? Are you okay this morning?" And to me, all of their demeanor and tone communicated to me that they understood that his sermon was about me, that he was talking about me. And in his sermon, he was saying too that church leadership also has an Ezra mandate to discipline congregates. And that, even though it may not be a spanking, literally, it still might look like that. And that, that we should be thanking God that he put people around us who have Ezra mandates to discipline us as they see fit. And so I'm hearing this sermon and realizing he's talking about me, and realizing that everyone else knows he's talking about me, and no one else seems to have a problem with what just occurred that Sunday. And so I went home to my husband and I explained what happened to him. And I was like, hey, I feel really uncomfortable. Being there. And so then it turned into shortly after that, the associate pastor calls my husband and says that he wants to have a shepherding meeting with us. Because one of the things that church does is they have shepherding elders. And what it is each of the elders has a certain number of families of the congregation that are under their leadership and authority, for them to do like check-ins with you, to kind of just see how your family is doing. We had never had a shepherding meeting with them while we were there.
You've been there for a few years before this point too, right?
We had been there a few years, and we had never had a shepherding meeting. And I don't know if it's because, the associate pastor was our shepherding elder. And so I don't know if he just felt like, because we were over at their house quite often.
Okay.
He just felt like through conversation and everything, he never felt like he needed to have a shepherding meeting with us. And he often would tell my husband that we were his easiest family because he would have to have meetings all the time with other congregants. And so we had never had one before. And so when he stated to my husband that he wanted to have one all of a sudden, because I believe he texted my husband asking for a meeting. And I asked him, I said, text him back and ask him if this has to do with the spanking stuff. And so my husband did, and he was like, yes, it does. And my husband then asked, is this a disciplinary meeting? And he was like, oh, no. Don't worry about that. I'm just checking in. So we set a date and time, and he comes to our house, and he has stacks upon stacks of papers that he has printed out of my social media and posts that I've made. And he explained that he also printed out things because he went into the different groups that I'm part of on Facebook and printed out things from there as well because he wanted to see what the different groups were about. And so then, right then, I have the feeling that, okay, this is disciplinary, whether it's officially disciplinary or not. You're coming in to,
You're prepared. Yep.
Yeah, this is serious.
This ain't just a meeting, even though it's weird to have a meeting about spanking. But the fact that he's got all your social media posts, he's got all the email, whatever it is, stacked up in front of him, the dude's ready for conversation.
Right. And so, we had a very lengthy conversation about that.
He knew previous to this that you guys didn't do it, right?
He knew previously, and he had spoken with my husband about it. And even though he greatly disagreed with us, he, at the time, had stated that like we could agree to disagree on it. Like
Sure.
it was not this issue. And so again, like it's not like I felt like I was going to be like I was going to have a target on my back necessarily because of this. I knew that I might be viewed differently um, by people, and I mean, I already was because of, I mean, they told us funny how they viewed us differently, and so I just kind of figured that this would be another thing that they chalked up to, just difference in opinion. Um,
Hmm.
and so when he was there and we were having these discussions, it became very clear that this was not just going to be a difference of opinion, that they were actually really having an issue with this now. Um, and uh, um, and at one point he was stating, well, what about the verse that says, that you'll save their soul from Sheol?
Mhm.
And I just flat out asked him, are you saying that Sheol is hell? Are you telling me that I'm saving my son's soul from hell if I spank him? And he wouldn't say yes to that. But from what growing up in Federal Vision, my parents would state it that way,
Hmm.
that if you're not spanking, then you're not leading them in the ways of the Lord,
Yep.
and they will be wayward
Mhm.
children and go to hell.
Yeah, you
And
got
so,
to beat the sin out of them, literally.
right, you do. And so it's like this roundabout way of stating that spanking is a way to save your child. Um, they won't say it directly, but
No.
they say it. They say it in all these other ways. And so, he wouldn't agree with that statement. And then it just kind of like at the end of the conversation, I just remember that my husband and I were like, well, like we're not changing our minds. We feel like this started out as us saying, hey, we come from abusive homes, and it's very triggering for us for you to tell us that we have to hit or flick our infant child. We cannot do that. To now, I feel very theologically confident in the Bible supporting my not taking this action. So, like, you're not going to change our mind. Um, and he left he left the meeting, very much communicating to us, or trying to communicate to us, that, like, this still isn't a big problem. Like, don't worry about it. But that was not the vibe that we got at all. Um, I felt like he was talking out of two sides of his mouth, especially coming in with his stacks of papers and being like, I have an issue with everything that you post and everything in these groups. And I disagree with you. And I think that you're not following scripture. And then, like, I mean, even talking about that sermon being preached, I you're telling me that I have a problem with God if I don't spank my child. And that calls into question all sorts of things about me. Um, so that, uh, yeah, that ended up becoming like a big deal. Um, and I mean, even in that sermon too, the Ezra mandate one, he was saying that if people are being wayward, Jesus says to treat them as Gentiles, which means that they don't get to have Christian fellowship anymore. And um, at that point too, my husband and I were very much on the receiving end of no longer being invited to people's homes. For previously, like, I mean, they would have a lot of the congregation lives in the same neighborhood.
Hmm.
So they would all get together at like different homes, and they'd invite different people from the congregation. And we stopped getting invites to all of those things. And so it felt very much like this is the way that you're being disciplined, by no longer being able to have Christian fellowship with us, that we are, to be treated as Gentiles in this way, um, because of this issue around
Because you
us
wouldn't spank your
not,
kids.
not thanking. And I mean, even towards the end of us being there, the associate pastor was explaining to my husband that because of that, they then took that to mean that I was the one ruling the home, and my husband
Of course.
was being a submissive husband, and that we were, sinning in that way. Um, and that he was just allowing me to kind of like run things. And they had a very big problem with that. They thought that this was like a very deep issue that was occurring within our home. Um, Also because one of the other issues that they had that they called on to bring up as an example of my husband being a submissive husband was when my daughter was born, we co-slept.
Hmm.
And we co-slept with her until she was 3. And that whole time, the associate pastor would ask my husband, oh, is your daughter, is she in her own room yet? Have you moved her out of your bed yet? And my husband would tell him, no, like she sleeps with us still. Her and Allie, like really need that their sleep. She still nurses a lot. Like this is what's working for us. And he'd be like, well, how are you guys having sex? Aren't you guys doing that? And my husband would be like, this is not a concern of yours. But it was something that he would bring up quite often to my husband, to where my husband would come home from them hanging out and he'd be like, you will not believe what he asked me again. And I'm like,
Gosh.
I bet I do. Was it about Emmy? And he'd be like, yep. He's asking if we've moved her out of our room yet. And and uh so all of these things, I think they viewed it as just that I was the one kind of running the household, and my poor deprived husband was just being left to the wayside. So
Spanking, along with homeschool and or classical schooling, is the Trojan horse Doug rides into the Reformed Church all too often. He knows he can't get in theologically, but he can culturally. As you heard last Saturday with Rachel Den Hollander, abuse is a hot topic in these churches. Hot, as in, you can't talk about it here. You must provide your witnesses and let the church handle it. Why would you bring the authorities in? Allie was concerned, so she posted about it. Here's how her OPC responded.
and then I went and I don't remember how much longer it was after that, but I posted an article from a woman who had experienced abuse in the OPC.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember her name, um, but she had experienced it at multiple OPCs, and she had written this blog post, kind of calling out the OPC and saying, "Hey, can you guys take this seriously? Like this is something that is happening, not just at one church, not just at 2 churches, but like she had been abused in multiple churches." And I posted it with a caption kind of echoing her sentiment, saying, yeah, like this is serious and we need to be paying attention to it. Um, and then the associate pastor comments on it, and he was like, "Dear sister, um, as your pastor, I'd like to give you a call about this article." And I said, "Sure, yeah, call me." And so he calls and he's like, "Hey, first of all, I just want to ask you, um, do you know of instances of abuse in our church?"
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was thinking that that was kind of an odd question. I mean, even though, generally speaking, that's a wise thing to want to know.
Mm-hmm.
You should want to know if there's abuse that's occurring. Um, and I told him, I was like, no, not that I know of. Um, and he was like, oh, okay. So I want you to take that article down. And he was like, I, I really disagree with it. I think that it casts a bad light, and I really think you should take it down. I was like, no, I don't want to take it down. And we spent a while kind of going back and forth in disagreement. And he was saying that because she calls out the OPC, that it's really her like calling out Christ, and she's damaging she could be damaging people's view of the church, which then damages people's view of Christ. And I disagreed with him, and I said that calling out abuse does not call into question who Jesus is,
It's
but
love
that
for
it
his
just
church.
calls,
Yeah.
right, that it just calls into question abuse that's occurring, and that we should be aware of what's going on, and that I didn't care what denomination it was that she was calling out, that if that's occurring, then we need to pay attention to it and put a stop to it. Um, and he was disagreeing, and I walked over to my husband and kind of pulled the phone away from my ear and was like, hey, he called because he wants me to take down the article. And I was like, and I really don't want to. And my husband was like, well, he was like, because of how things have been, he was like, I really want us to be able to leave here like quietly and as like non-aggressively as possible. And he was like, so, he was like, do you think you could take it down? And I really didn't want to, but I understood where my husband was coming from. And so when I brought the phone back to my ear, and he finished, I just let him know. I was like, hey, I just want you to know uh, am very adamant in my disagreement with you on your view of this article. And I said, but for the sake of peace right now, I will remove it. And he was like, oh, thank goodness. Oh, okay, thank you. And was like, I really appreciate that. And then, we hung up and I removed it. And
A little odd that he's so relieved that an article on
yeah,
abuse is now gone.
yeah, it really the whole thing felt odd um to me. For him to like, I mean, he commented on it. I don't think the article had been up 15 minutes. And he reached out to want to discuss it and everything. And so yeah, the whole thing felt so weird and everything. So
In the midst of all of this, COVID was roaring throughout the world, and the LeReaux noticed the shift in preaching. It ceased being gospel centered and became hotly political. Not only that, she noticed it was directed. It was directed at her.
So, well, and that's what's interesting. So, towards the end of us being there, because all of these things were kind of happening in the beginning and sort of mid 2020,
Okay.
which is what I think kind of prompted all of this. Because
Yep.
2020, the head pastor started getting very volatile in his sermons
And was
about.
real quick, just so I have the timeline right. Sorry for interrupting, but just I'm trying to get the timeline, helping the listeners too. When he implicitly called you out from the pulpit, that was pre-COVID, or was that during COVID?
That was in 2020.
Okay.
So that was actually right, I think, when like right before shutdowns happened.
Okay. Gotcha.
But so yeah, so like then once shutdowns happened, he starts doing sermons from home, and he's being very aggressive in his sermons, talking about how this is God's judgment on this nation because we have been disobedient. We need to be called to repentance. We need to lead our country back to right standing with God. And my husband and I are like, what are these sermons? And so I think we had listened to a couple of them. And then my husband was just like, we're going to be listening to something else on Sunday mornings. We're not going to be listening to this because we don't want our kids hearing this
Nor is it a
nonsense.
sermon.
But then my husband would go back and listen because he was like, I'm really having a problem with him saying these things. And I want to bring it to leadership that like, should we not be holding him accountable for saying these things? And so that's what a lot of his sermons were focusing on. And then my husband's taking it to the associate pastor because they were really good friends. And the associate pastor is kind of giving my husband, yeah, he's feeling very passionate about all of this. kind of making it sound like he doesn't necessarily agree with him, but very much kind of playing both sides here, like trying to make my husband feel better while really not doing anything about it, even though he says that he does not agree. Then comes November of 2020. It's pre-election,
Mhm.
and he is going on about how we need to be voting for Trump. And at the time, I had, again, hello, social media, had been posting that, Christians should not feel that they are required to vote one way or another,
Yep.
or kind of be a part of the circus that 2020 was, that we can have freedom and not burden ourselves with all of this. And so he's giving a sermon in November, right before the election, about how voting is a big deal, and you need to be voting for the right person because that's a big deal. And I had been posting things that were talking about, how we can rest in the fact there's no king but Christ.
Mhm.
And he quotes that. He goes, there are some people who would tell you that there is no king but Christ. And he starts laughing at the pulpit and was saying how, like, that's just absurd. That's ignoring the fact that, the only applicable way that we can, or the only practical way that we can apply the verses that tell us to be salt and light is through voting. And next Sunday, when you all come into church after voting, I'm going to be able to tell by the look on your faces who you voted for, whether you are happy or disappointed in the results, and yada, 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 talking about how, he really hopes that he doesn't see a whole lot of disappointed faces, because that'll tell him who you voted for, and, this and that. And so again, my husband goes to the associate pastor and is like, look, his sermons none of them have anything to do with the gospel.
Mm-mm.
Like, he's like, my husband took notes upon notes upon notes. Like, he went back so far listening to sermons and being like, this has been a pattern for a very long time. And he was like, we disagree. At that point, we had a new shepherding elder because the associate pastor, I think, was kind of done trying to deal with us when it came to the spanking stuff and everything. We had a new shepherding elder, and my husband has a meeting with him at a coffee shop, the notorious let's meet for coffee. And my husband's like, look, we have a really big issue with this. In that sermon, I did forget to say, in that sermon, he quoted Doug Wilson.
Mm.
And isn't this a big deal? Because that's what the church split over. Should he not be more careful about quoting someone who not only has our denomination said he promotes heretical views or believes them or teaches them, and so you should be cautious in that sense, but also because, like, the church split over this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, should there not be more wisdom here? And he was like, oh, well, actually, I really appreciate Doug Wilson's views on marriage and the family. And I was like, what? I'm sorry, what? And so then he comes home to me and he's like, this shepherding elder was saying this, and he's like, maybe is it because he's newer? Like, he had come in a couple of years, I think, at that point. So he was a newer one. He was like, does he not, he's like, what's going on here? Why is he saying these things? He then goes to the associate pastor and is like, hey, isn't this not a problem? Like, you sat down with us and told us that you guys don't want to have anything to do with him. He's now quoting him from the pulpit. And the associate pastor goes, I never said those things to you. I never told you that we interviewed him and questioned him. I never told you that we had a problem with Doug Wilson. In fact, he's like, I actually really like and appreciate a lot of the things that Doug Wilson has to say on marriage and the family.
You're like, hold up, what?
And my husband goes, wait, what? He goes, you told us. And he's all, no, I didn't. And and so then like my husband is furious at this point. And he's going like, I sat there and he said that. You sat there, you heard him say these things. Why is he telling us? And like everybody's flipping the script now. Um and and changing things up on us. And so then my husband meets with the shepherding elder again. And he's like, we really are thinking that we're going to leave. And my husband's saying like, this is important to us. We don't like that the head pastor is saying that that John Piper's his favorite theologian, that his sermons are devoid of the gospel, that he's quoting Doug Wilson, that none of you seem to be having a problem with any of this. And the shepherding elder was just like, well, like, I mean, it's okay that the head pastor is saying these things because we know that he lives the gospel. And my husband was like, what does that even mean? Like all of his sermons, none of his sermons have anything to do with the gospel. And that's what we're here to listen to each week. We need to be reminded of the gospel. And he was like, well, you get the gospel in the songs that we sing, so you don't need it in a sermon.
He said that.
He said that. And my husband was like, no, you do. And he was like, well, maybe you're just of the belief that every sermon needs to point back to Jesus. And that's just, you're just wired that way. You and Allie are wired differently. And my husband
Not
was
to
like,
mention that's
no.
in the OPC Book of Church Order. That's also in the Westminster Confession of Faith and Standards on
Right.
one of the like the number one mark of a Christian church is you preach the gospel.
Right. And if we say, and because he would say that, well, there are just sometimes passages that don't talk about Jesus. And we're sitting there going, okay, if you want to tell us that all of Scripture screams the gospel and screams of God's plan to come and save his people with his son, how could you say that some passages have nothing to do with that? And you're telling us that you can't make a connection. And it's not like it was just one or two sermons. It was sermons for years that we went back and listened to and said, no gospel. There's no gospel. It's just law. He's just burdening everyone. He's saying that we don't do enough, that if you want blessings from God, you need to be obedient and faithful. And that's how you'll receive blessings. And so it's not like it was one or two sermons where he didn't happen to pull the gospel out of some arbitrary text. Like that's not what was occurring.
Yeah.
And so then at that point, my husband was just like, no. He was like, we're just going to be leaving. And he was like, well, I'm really sad to see you go. And he was asking us, he was like, would you meet with the head pastor and explain to him your reasons for leaving? Because I'm sure he would love to know what he needs to fix so that he can keep people like you. And my husband said, no. We're not going to meet with him and give him ammo to manipulate people to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And then and he was like, okay, well, he was like, how about I give you a list of churches that you can visit? And my husband said, no, we don't want a list of churches that you recommend. Like no. And he and I were both of agreement that we didn't want them knowing where we were attending because we were like, none of this feels very safe. And then we are still friends with people there. We're in communication somewhat.
The LeReaux left after all the spiritual abuse. Here's what Allie would like you to hear.
I think just to really listen to the voices of all these people who have left or gotten out, who have been hurt, and to see that there's a vast range in harm that's occurring here. not just in people who are leaving his direct church, but people who are coming out of even just being taught things in school from him, or from homes where parents might have his books and they're implementing the practices that he suggests. But to really listen to these stories with an open mind, and that it's not just a small handful of people who are being hurt in this small, tiny piece of the world, but that his reach is really far and wide, and that it's happening all over, and that I think that he's not some fringe pastor with some fringe beliefs that are hurting just a couple of people, but that this is something that is serious, that his belief system attacks the gospel, and it hurts people. And I mean, what does Paul have to say about wolves in sheep's clothing? And I think that we really need to look at him and his belief system that he promotes as that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, and it's causing so much harm.
Lastly, we move on to Heather Nadreau, a former member of Christ Church Spokane, a church in the CREC. Let's introduce her.
Okay. My name is Heather Nadreau. I was first introduced to Christ Church and Doug Wilson's teachings when I was, about 23, through my ex-husband. He was raised in Moscow, Idaho, in Doug Wilson's church. And so we wanted to seek approval from his parents to be married, and we wanted to be part of that church and be kind of reintegrated into his family. He was slightly estranged because of the church, and we sought to be a family, I guess, essentially.
Cool. Was your now ex-husband, was he already a member or attending Christ Church before you guys had met?
He was a member. I think that in his younger years, he was under discipline. When discipline in the church means that it's posted in the bulletin every Sunday that you are under discipline, what that looks like, whether you'll be held away from communion, or whether other congregation need to stay away from affiliating with that person unless they were stronger members of the church, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. Before you started at Christ Church, what did you have a church background? What was your church background like before going to Christ Church?
I was raised Baptist. It was very close-minded Baptist, I would say. So I yearned for a church that didn't preach judgment so much or condemnation, and included all nationalities.
I asked Heather to talk about women in the CREC. How were they viewed? How are they talked about? What are their roles? Here's her answer.
Women have kind of a voice amongst women, unless that voice goes too far, and then it will be brought to men. Women have a voice amongst women and children. We don't have a voice amongst men. As a woman in Christ Church, I felt fragile, vulnerable, gullible, easily manipulated. That's the way I felt like they had told me that God made me. And that's why I needed a man as my head, just as man need, they're very, very old school. Everybody is, there are very, very, very few women who work outside the home. And if you do, it's not shunned on, it's not frowned upon, but it's almost pitied. Like, how have to work outside the home and you can't be doing what you should be doing. It's they marry so young. All their girls marry. I mean, when girls that are raised in the church are married almost right at 18, they find somebody and marry them and start having kids and becoming the home life. It's just very, very old school, very Little House on the Prairie kind of old school, if that makes sense. The women with the women, the men with the men. The men are the head of the house. The women are the head of the children. So yeah, very extremely conservative.
So you weren't at Christ. Sorry, keep going.
Dancing is not looked. Dancing is something that is very iffy. You can dance. They've got to be usually like old school kind of dances. If they do dances with younger kids where girls will be dancing with boys, it's always lessons on like square dances or things like that. And it's always extremely chaperoned. In marriage, courting is required in the families. I feel like if any marriage happens, it's always courtship first. And the courtship is heavily between the dad and the fiance. They have their strong relationship, and the dad tells him, it's the relationship with the dad and son-in-law before the relationship with the daughter is allowed.
What Heather says next is significant. I asked her how aware she was of other women who were being abused and how abuse was viewed or handled in the CREC.
I feel like it was viewed as wrong, but I don't feel like it was viewed as criminal. It was viewed as something. It was just always given grace. Like, we're going to give grace to this and we're going to pour love into it. And we're going to, I just felt like it was something that I don't even think they really cared. They just wanted our family to look like the other ones.
Almost like if we treat this abuse as it really is, then this family doesn't quite fit the mold of what we're looking for in the church.
Honestly, in the time that I was going through the church and the abuse, I know that the abuse that I was having in my home was probably smaller in comparison. My ex-husband's one of 7 kid family, and his little sisters were going to Logos at the time, and they were going through abuse at the schools. I think Christ Church didn't really look at, I don't know, I think a lot of their problems, were more on that than inter-family church problems, if that makes sense. And even to this day, I actually asked my ex-husband if he would want to speak about Christ Church and his experience with it, because he's no longer part of it. And his response was something along the lines of, no, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. And I don't want to, I'm not looking out to, and I mentioned, well, don't you want to speak out for your sisters who went through abuse at Logos? And even he just then was like, no, that never happened. Well, I think they just, I think they believe that it's just, if you pray and change, it just never happened. But they don't change, pray, and I don't know.
Yeah, they handle it in-house versus, or quote unquote, handle it in-house versus doing something about it, or calling real counselors or authorities or whatever you may have to do to actually deal with the situation, versus just saying like, we'll figure this out on our own.
Yeah. They always, they've got the they've got the right book, they've got the right elder, they've got the right group, they've got the, yeah, it was always books, elders, or groups.
But Heather isn't only speaking out because of what she saw, but because of what happened to her. Here's her story in brief.
I always questioned the CREC's religious background. I do not believe in predestination at all. So in my mind, I don't think in my heart I would ever fully be part of the church. It was more the people that I was part of, I feel like. So I was always questioning and getting into debates with my husband about their theology. It bothered me. It started bothering me when I noticed other people in the church being disciplined, just in the fact of it being public, of them excusing people from communion was a big thing for me. If you came into my home and excused my children from my dinner table, that wouldn't be okay with me. So why would we do it in God's home? But we had problems as well. So our marital problems and life choice problems that were very out in the world to see for the church, we ended up as disciplined in the church as well. Through my husband was physically abusive. I brought that to the church. And it was kind of, I don't know, I felt like it was just dealt with through scripture and prayer. And then it got to the point that I moved out and I got a restraining order. The church then held a elders meeting for me and my ex-husband. Each of us came in separately. I don't know what they said to him in his elders meeting. In mine, I don't remember what was said from everybody. The only thing I do remember from it was Pastor Kenneth something. He just told me that I wanted to be abused because if I didn't, then I wouldn't be there. And if I wanted out, I would get out, which in hindsight now, as a woman who's out, he was right, but that's for another woman to tell a woman, not a man. I don't know. I didn't take it well when I heard it. I guess it didn't strike me as loving or caring or protective in any way. I didn't feel protected. After that, we were very, very involved in church. I mean, we wanted to get on the path. We wanted our marriage to work, and we thought the church was the answer. I delved deep into the accountability groups and the women that were my age that also had children my age. We met once a week. I think we met for maybe 2 years on a regular basis. And then I confided in that women's group that my husband was still being abusive to me verbally and physically. And it was a pretty emotional meeting. I just laid it all out. I was crying. I was, I was pretty raw. And later that evening, one of the ladies called me to tell me that I needed to seek forgiveness for slandering my husband. That was when my heart decided that I needed to leave the church, that it wasn't going to protect me. It was always going to protect him. And then it was shortly, maybe a week after that, I had found some text messages my ex had between another single mom, and I called Yost about it. He came to our house. Dave proceeded to start to get verbally violent, and so Yost dismissed him. When he left the room, Yost told me I didn't have grounds for divorce. And that is the day I left the church. I asked Yost to leave my house and I filed for divorce the next day, and I never went back. Never talked to anybody again from it. Never.
She noticed how she was being treated versus how her husband was being treated. She noticed what was expected of her versus what was expected of her husband. So they were counseled. How did that go?
That looked like me and Dave going through the Love and Respect series. We had books at home we went through every week on, I don't know if you've heard of that. Yeah, everybody has. So we went through that. Dave met with Yost once a week. They had their own, I don't know what their meetings entailed of. I continued to meet with ladies. I never really met with Yost unless it was occasional. I would meet with Yost. It was always in his office. Men and women never met in private. It was always well known. It was always, and I knew that personally. I always knew as well. Like if I came to Yost, it would always be at his office or never or planned or I don't know. It was more women stay with women and men stay with men in the church. It was never really mixed. So that's what it looked like. The first time I brought abuse to the church, it was just Yost. Yost encouraged me that if the abuse did continue, to get a restraining order. And that's what I did. When the restraining order happened, that's when we delved into just heavy, I don't know, repentance training, whatever you want to call it. And it was about 6 months of that. And I dropped the restraining order and moved back in with Dave.
Mm-hmm. And then the second time when Yost came over, so what, he said you didn't have grounds for divorce. What did he ground that on?
So when Dave first stepped out on our marriage, Yost, I mean, I was moved. I mean, I was obviously extremely heartbroken, but I was also, to me, what builds respect for somebody is somebody who can look you in the eye and say, I did you wrong, and not blame anybody else. And so I saw that. I felt that, and it was something that was so wrong, and he had the boldness to do that. Yost there in the office said, you need to decide. Are you going to divorce him? Or are you not? You have grounds for divorce right now. I felt like I needed to decide right there. And so I decided to stay. When Yost came back, the day that I dismissed him from my home, I'm a singer, and I was in a singing competition. The night of my competition, my ex-husband didn't go. And the next day I had found that he had texted a single mom and asked her to go join him that evening. So I brought that to Yost, and Yost just said that, he didn't step out on your marriage. There's no grounds for divorce. And to me, it wasn't, I guess I was hoping that he would say it, but it wasn't. It was just, ultimately I left because I didn't want to raise my kids to be that.
Mm-hmm.
I got 3 boys now, but they're gonna know love, and they're gonna show love.
Now that Heather has left that abusive marriage and the spiritual abuse she endured in the CREC, what kind of advice would she give to those inside, outside, and interested?
To the family that's interested, I would just say, men feel very empowered and elevated in that church. And so it is super enticing, especially to them. But think about how it's just think about your women and your wives and daughters, about their joy, about their what word am I looking for? Their significance, I guess. Do they have significance beyond submission and creation?
Yeah.
And yes, we do. And in that church, they don't. So I would just implore them to think about their daughters, their wives, their just how they view women's significance.
And then those who are part of
Don't do it.
it. Yeah. Yep.
Those who are part of it,
And maybe think like, maybe I deserve this, or I'm just not being a good enough wife, which is why I'm being abused. And maybe the elders are right. What do I do?
nobody deserves it ever. I mean, a coward is somebody who is physically violent towards somebody that they can restrain easily without violence. Like there's never a need. There's never God doesn't want God wants everything for you that the church says he wants for your husband. God wants things for you. And when I left, I was a nobody in reality out in the world. I had no bank accounts. I had no work history. I had no rental history. I literally was like a ghost. And I thought that if I left, I would be homeless and my kids would be taken away. And that didn't happen at all. I struggled, yes, but I struggled with joy and I struggled with significance. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And now I'm on the outside looking in, and it's so much better. Just your brain is going to tell you it's going to be worse than it really is going to be. And it's so much easier to leave than you think.
Heather finishes her story with a challenge. I know that men in the CREC are hate listening. I know men in the Reform world are also hate listening. I keep track of the Reform message boards and comments throughout social media. So I will ask the men, will you take up Heather's challenge? Here it is.
I would challenge any men in Christ Church that listen to this. I dare you even. Let your women and your children meet with somebody in private, unaffiliated with the church, who will not report back to the church, to be open and honest with what they experience, with how they feel about who they are, about how they feel God views them, how they feel their father in their house views them and treats them. I don't know. I challenge them to do that, to listen to their family without their ego involved.
I would like to thank Aimee Byrd, LeReaux, and Heather Nadreau for their courage, vulnerability, and transparency in sharing their stories and experiences. Spiritual abuse so often gets short shrift because so many assume it's not that bad. Get over it. But, as I said earlier in this episode, it makes you question everything. You question the church, your pastors, your elders, the congregation. It makes you question everything you've ever been taught and those who have oversight of your soul. You wonder, why would God allow this to happen to me? Those charged as your shepherds become the very ones who mock you, deride you, question you, make fun of you, gaslight you, and then turn the blind eye against you. Ezekiel 34 has something to say about that, and I will end with the words of the Lord from verses 7 through 10 and 16. Therefore, you shepherd, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered, and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths and will no longer be food for them. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. Next week, we continue with our series of abuse in the OPC with another CREC story added in. See you then.